Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Sachin Karnik here. Today is the 13th of March, 2025. We're continuing our examination of the religious studies arm of Angel Wing LLC that we started recently. This is something, as I stated before, I was quite hesitant to do this on the Angel Wing platform simply because it is an extraordinarily complex and convoluted subject. But nonetheless, since you all wanted it, and I also wanted to do it, but just by I think by grace, if you want to use that word, it has come about. We are continuing every Thursday, and we are going to continue all the way through, for the remainder of this year into next year, and just keep going parallel to the Tuesday evening presentation. Couple of quick reminders and couple of quick points. We are examining the Hebrew Bible. We have been examining the forbidden fruit analogy, or some people like to take it literally. That's completely up to you. You can take it the way you want. Please also keep in mind the general disclaimer from Angel Wing LLC that we do not promote or criticize any religious, spiritual, or meditative tradition. We are presenting different perspectives, and I try to present things, as Sachin is doing many presentations here, try to present things as objectively as possible. It may not always be possible, but when I give my opinion or perspective, I'll say that outright. So it is a platform for sharing. It is a platform for exploration. There is no intention to convince somebody of one viewpoint versus another. There are thousands of perspectives and viewpoints on any subject. It's quite mind-boggling at times. But in any case, it's also very, very powerful in terms of strengthening our intellectual muscle. We all come from different backgrounds. We have our own certain kinds of beliefs or perspectives, and perhaps they can be enhanced further. So that's just a small disclaimer. Now, today we're going to get into something very fascinating, and these are the 5 omni qualities. I remember taking philosophy of religion class when I was an undergraduate student, and this is one of the subjects that was discussed, and that's kind of stayed with me. The omni qualities are discussed in the Judeo-Christian tradition. I think they are there in the Islamic tradition and many of the theistic sects, S-E-C-T-S, within the Hindu tradition also. So what are the 5 omni qualities of God? Now remember, we're talking about a monotheistic God here. Right, so we're talking about the Hebrew Bible particularly, and then this can extend into the New Testament also. The 5 omni qualities of one monotheistic God are generally considered to be these 5: omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent or omnibenevolence, and omni-eternality. What that means is God exists beyond time. We're going to go through each of these very carefully. Omnipotence is a quality. Now, let's back up for one moment. When we use the word God, remember in the Old Testament, it's like an unpronounceable word. They said he who has no name, that you cannot speak his name or should not speak his name. This was the idea. So then the word Yahweh came, and then there's Jehovah and the Elohim. These are words that have come in the Old Testament, and then as with the advent of Jesus, the concept of Trinity came about within Christianity in the tradition: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the 3 persons in one of the one supreme God. God is only one, not 2 or 3, but there are 3 persons in one. This is the Trinity concept. All right. So in both traditions, let's just stick to Judaism and Christianity, these 5 omni qualities are accepted. As far as I know, I don't believe anybody would deny any of them. Let's go through them and what they're all about, what it all means in relation to the fall analogy, etc. So the 5 omni qualities of God are attributes that describe the infinite and absolute nature of the divine in various theological and philosophical traditions. These qualities emphasize God's supreme power, presence, and supreme knowledge. Supreme presence, supreme knowledge. That the supreme, the topmost of everything. So omnipotence can do everything. God is the all-powerful, having unlimited authority and control over all creation. This means that nothing is beyond God's power and he can accomplish anything that is logically possible. So this is called omnipotence. Let's talk about this first. Remember, the monotheistic concept is that there's one supreme reality, not just reality, but a being, an actual being. It's not just some abstract consciousness like in the non-dualistic tradition of India, the Vedanta tradition. No, there's actually, it's a being. Now it's unclear. I don't think there's actual agreement on God having a form or not. That is an interesting question in both Judaism and Christianity. I think there's quite a bit of debate about that. I don't think there's even consensus about that, as far as I know. If someone has more information about that, do let me know. But I don't believe there's consensus. There is a transcendent God. I mean, like, for example, God speaks through the burning bush in the Old Testament. Jesus says, I and the Father are one. And then Jesus is considered to be human manifestation of that divine. Okay, but is in the transcendent reality, what we call heaven or beyond even heaven, let's say, because God created heaven, so maybe God is beyond heaven, right? You can think of it that way. Is that a being, like we're a being, but he's not a human being. It's a divine mind, divine consciousness. What is that made out of? What is that being? What is the substance? Is it a material substance like us, like this material world? I think both Judaism and Christianity would say, no, God is spirit. It is a spiritual being, a non-material, trans-empirical being. And so this is the question about the ontology of that supreme being that is called God in the Old and New Testament. What is the composite of the body? Is there a body? Or if there's no body, is it just a mind, a disembodied mind? See, when we say body, we're talking about our bodies. And even in Christianity, when Jesus is considered to be embodied, that God has taken an incarnation or the incarnation, the only incarnation in human form, that's what Christians believe, that is called the incarnation. Jewish don't accept that idea about Jesus. They consider him as a teacher or a rabbi, something like that. They don't consider him as a manifestation of God. It's only the Christian tradition that accepts Jesus as the one and only manifestation. Nobody else agrees with this point. But anyway, that's a different subject altogether. So the question is, the transcendent God, when we are saying that, is that a being that has form or not? And if we're saying God is omnipotent, omnipotence as a quality, that means doership, the capacity to do. So can a formless being do anything using logic? Like, for example, if you just have, body that has been it's not a living body, but it's just a body with parts. There's no life in it. Its life is gone. So, but to do something, a body is required. That's from our perspective. Is that true for God? I don't know that in either tradition, Judaism or Christianity, there's any answer to that. There is the notion that God is the all-doer, or has the capacity, the potentiality to do everything in heaven and on earth, in heaven and in the material world. If you were to make a demarcation, this is just now, I'm going to give you share with you some of my commentary on this one. This is just a way to think about this. That if you make a demarcation line, underneath that line is the material world, meaning what? Space-time causality. Space-time causality, meaning the creation of space itself. Within that space, there are infinite number of galaxies, as we already know. There's no infinite number of universes. So we could extrapolate from some of the biblical language that the tree of knowledge of good and evil is an access point into the material world, which was forbidden. So it was forbidden to eat of that fruit. Maybe that's an analogy. Maybe it's something transcendental, whatever. But it's an access point into the realm of the material world. And again, we talked about that before already. I won't repeat some of the points I've already covered on that. So then God, meaning that being that is beyond the material world, would be a transcendent being, not stuck in the material world. So this notion of monotheism is quite different from pantheism or non-dualism. So there's non-dualism, which is called Advaita. Pantheism is the all-God theory. Then there's henotheism, there's dualism, and there's qualified non-dualism. And then there's atheism, negative and positive atheism also. So again, I don't want to divert into that. I'm just mentioning it as a corollary. So if the contention is that there is one transcendent being that is beyond the material creation, and that same being by its own power or his own power has created the infinite material creation, and that tree, because there's two trees described in Genesis, the tree of life and the forbidden tree, the tree with the forbidden fruit. Both trees are described in Genesis. And then once the forbidden fruit is eaten, the expulsion from the Garden of Eden occurs, and then the cherubim are placed. These are guardians. There's a flaming sword going in all directions, preventing entrance back into heaven, because if those who have fallen out into the material world, into the knowledge of good and evil, etc., they're aware of their physical consciousness as male, female. I mean, maybe they were aware of that before, but there's a hiding from God. And you see that entire story in Genesis. Adam and Eve are hiding from God. They cover up their genital organs. The separation from that communion is what's described there. Fascinating. So the cherubim are placed. This flaming sword is talked about, going in all directions to prevent anybody who has fallen into the material world, into the knowledge of good and evil, to come back into heaven, to prevent them from coming back into heaven by eating anything from the tree of life or touching the tree of life or something like that. This is the story in Genesis. Now, to understand this even further, this is where these omni qualities come into the picture. So what is that being? There's a lot of questions that theologians have tried to grapple with over thousands of years. Why did God create anything to begin with? If we say that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth and all that, according to Judeo-Christian theology, God is the creator, the source of all creation. But the theology is not such that God became the creation. That's the difference. It's like Adam was created, Eve was created, the different animals in the Garden of Eden, the description in Genesis. It's not that God became all of that. There's a certain mental power or some kind of a power, divine power is used to create. Why? Even the forbidden tree, who created that? Somebody else created that? Some other God created that? Some other being created that? Then that would be against monotheism. So monotheism means that there's only one being. Otherwise, you wind up in polytheism. So if there's only one being, then he's the same being, that same Trinity or that same transcendent God has created the forbidden tree. Why? Why create the forbidden tree? Why create that tree, make it forbidden, and then with foreknowledge that the Adam and Eve and others are going to indulge in that? And then on top of that, anybody who eats of that fruit will know what God knows, and God also says their eyes are opened. The serpent also says to Eve, your eyes shall be open, you shall know what God knows. He's hiding things from you. So she's tempted, and then she eats it, but they're disobedient, so they're expelled into all the turmoil and the toil. But the fact of the matter still is that God is the one who created everything. Why? I cannot answer this question. I don't think anybody's ever been able to answer that question. It's not a question that can be answered using our limited intellect. Again, I don't want to divert too much into that, but this question comes about through the fall. And this similar ideas are there in the Indian tradition also, but I don't want to go into that direction right now either. I'm just mentioning it quickly. That this kind of a question, why does ignorance exist? Why does the fall exist? Why the forbidden tree is there? Why God created the forbidden fruit? If he's the all-doer, why he's not stopping all the pain and suffering and the horror show that is going on in the world from time to time to time? All the pain and trouble and wars and diseases, and why this human body even has any diseases? Why is there even birth and death? Why is all this thing here? Why is there any suffering? So all of those questions disappear when one enters into Eden. The questions don't arise. It's like asking, why is there darkness? If you're asking the sun, explain what is darkness, the sun says, I don't know what is darkness. There's nothing like darkness. If you're inside the sun, is there the concept of day and night is not there. The concept of darkness is not there. So similar kind of mystical answers are given by the mystics in Judaism and Christianity. I can give you the references if you want, but in particular in the Eastern traditions, this is the answer that's given. Why is there ignorance, or why is there pain, suffering? They said that this question is wrong. You're asking this question from a limited fallen intellect. That's where the question is originating from. The question will disappear. It's like saying, why does darkness exist? We don't know why it exists. Does it actually even exist? Is there something called darkness? Or is it just the absence of light? Is there some object that is darkness? No. So why does it exist? We don't know why it exists. It may not even exist actually. So when the sun comes up, the concept of darkness goes away. And if you're close to the sun, there's no concept of darkness. There's no concept of day or night. So another way to understand the being that is God is to go close to God. And the closer we go through devotion, this is the tradition generally, the monotheistic traditions of the world, the closer one goes through devotion, faith, surrender, atonement, all of those ideas. As one goes closer, that divinity begins to come into one's life. So these questions are answered not intellectually, they're answered through revelation. And one would have to go into profound Jewish and Christian theology to understand what Sachin is trying to express. I only have 10 more minutes left. There's no way we can go through 5,000 pages of scholarly as well as theological work. Thousands of pages are written on these questions, not few hundred. So, and most people who are throughout the world religious, they have not studied these things. You would wonder why not? Why not? Life is for studying these things. So amazing. But it's fantastic to try to connect with God through the recognition of the omni qualities. And that was the point I was trying to make actually with this long-winded introduction. These omni qualities, if they are accepted that God is omnipotent, God is omnipotence, has the capacity to do anything and everything, is happening. Everything is happening by the divine will. Okay, this is one thing to understand, right? That's omnipotence. So let's just stay with that for a moment. If God is doing everything, what about my will? Look at the prayers. Thy will be done. Thy kingdom come. The my is put on the side. The limited ego, the limited individualized, ego-driven or the me-centered activity is all put on the side in dualistic worship. So in dualistic worship, the me subsides. It is a path of thou. Remember, there's three paths generally talked about. The path of thou, the path of just the non-dual consciousness, Eastern traditions, and the path of me and you, qualified non-dualism. Right? So there's three general paths. So the path of thou art all. So total subservience, total surrender. And in that, God's omnipotence is acknowledged. Let's just stay with that today. Let's not get into the other four. We'll talk about those later. Let's just stay with one point. If God's omnipotence is believed, that is called faith. Somehow that faith comes about through scriptural study, through going to synagogues or churches, or however it comes about. There is faith in the existence of God, and then there is faith that there is recognition or belief in the omnipotence of God. Okay? Then what happens psychologically? Psychologically, all tension dissipates. This is the psychology of religious belief. The tension is gone because there's a turning over of one's entire will to the divine will. One still functions transactionally in the world, but one is not functioning out of fear, out of any kind of unnecessary agitations. Everything is turned over. Thy will be done. Thy will, not my will. Just that one line says it all. But that is the transmutation of the individual human will to realign with the divine will. So if you look at the New Testament teachings, Jesus' teachings all the way through, that's what he's talking about. Whether it's the Sermon on the Mount or the two greatest commandments, or in Matthew 22, things like that. So there's so many places where this turn of the individual will back into the divine will is taught and even shown. And then in the tradition that has evolved with the thousands and thousands of churches and different denominations and different synagogues and different, types of Judaism and whatnot, in both traditions and the Islamic tradition also, what do you find? You find this turning over. Even in like Islam, the 5-time prayers, 5 times facing towards Mecca. They're not really praying to Mecca, but they're facing there because of some historical significance. They're praying to Allah, basically. They're praying to the one supreme being. It's a monotheistic religion. You see, so the turning over of the me into the thou, that turnover is a profound psychological transmutation by recognizing the omnipotence or the omnipotence or the omnipotent nature of that divine being. It's a quality. How many qualities does God have? Infinite. This is what the traditions would say. There are infinite number of redemptive qualities. We're already at 7:24. I got to watch the time here. Okay, so they're redemptive qualities. What does that mean? That these qualities are manifested, these divine qualities are manifested in enlightened beings to some extent or another. They are manifested, God manifests them in different ways to redeem the individuals, the people that have fallen from the grace of God. That is a doctrine of redemption. Redemption means what? To re-establish the right kind of communion with God, not union with God. See the difference? And please remember, I'm speaking strictly from Judeo-Christian perspective right now. It is a communion with God, not union with God. Union meaning you are that, you become that, or you become that reality. No, that's not what the true traditions say. The mystics come close to that in both traditions, but we'll leave that aside for now. Like Meister Eckhart, and there's a whole bunch of them. I won't go into that right now. That's very profound stuff. But in terms of what actually happens in the liberated state, assuming that one goes out of that, that barrier that the cherubim have put, you go outside, you go into heaven, you don't become God. That would be non-dualism. No, you are always in the subservient position. There's always a dualism in the redemptive state, in the state of, when we leave this world, and some people believe you get this body back, some people believe you get some different body. There's stuff like that. That's another metaphysical question altogether. So the presence of God is always transcendent, and the individual who is surrendered to God is always subservient to God, now as well as in the redemptive state. And God's omnipotence means that everything is happening by his will, and we cannot know using our limited intellect that full reality. We are only knowing very slight, like a slice of reality. We don't know the full reality. Even our brain, our mind cannot ever see the full reality. Not this way, because as long as this body is here, this brain is here, there's limitation. When that new body is given in the divine realm, whatever that may be, then what God knows or what that is, that may be revealed at that time. It's something which is a great mystery, right? So there's a lot to be said about this. Today, I just wanted to present this one quality of omnipotent, meaning the all-doership. Everything is happening by his will. So there's a common phrase that's used. We cannot understand what is God's master plan. We say this all the time. But so many people say this. We cannot understand the master plan, the master design. We talked about in the previous recordings, we've talked about the argument from design, the teleological argument for the existence of God. I don't want to go into that right now. But again, omnipotence means all doership. But we also have free will. But where has our free will come from? The theistic religions would say that free will has been granted by God. So a choice can be made. Do we want to stay in communion with that supreme reality, that supreme being, or stay away from that supreme being by our own individualized thoughts, feelings, experiences, the things that we want to do, the enjoyments of the material world. That's that fruit again, the forbidden fruit has a taste, right? If you were to draw that analogy further, just use the analogy of the objects of the senses. They have certain experience behind them. People love money. People love the pleasures of the flesh. This is the examples. This is language in the Bible, pleasures of the flesh, right? That's described there. The love of money. Then Jesus says it's easier for a camel to go through eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. He's not criticizing a rich person. He's talking about the greed inside, the greed, the attachments inside. You can interpret it that way. Anyway, the point is that there's a choice. My will has a choice. We can either turn our will and turn it over to thy will, or we can keep it and keep rolling around in that until the end of this life. And then whatever happens at that point. That's another subject altogether. You see, so omnipotence, another way to understand this is by seeing the mystery of creation. That there's so much activity going on at all levels. Is there a supreme authority, the Elohim concept, the king of all kings, the Elohim? Is that supreme being, this total sovereign, the one controlling it all? That's the concept, that there's the one being who has total purview, omnipotent. Questions come about. Why is there evil? Why is there suffering? Why is this? But as I mentioned, those questions are coming out of the fallen state. Now, atheists would say, no, that's a cop-out. You cannot give that kind of an answer. So there's debates. There's no end to the debates in atheism and in pantheism. There's all different kinds of theories here. I don't want to confuse the issue because it will get really tangled up if I try to present all those other ideas in this. So we shouldn't go into that too much because our mind will turn into a jelly, actually. You start talking about atheism and negative atheism and pantheism and all that stuff, So we need time to digest just this one idea. So that's what I promised you all. I would try to present one or two ideas only, because I have a tendency, whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, I don't know, but a tendency to talk too much and to present too much material all at one time. So we don't want to do that. We are interested in wisdom and personal growth and exploration. And rather than my Sachin here bombarding all of you with all kinds of ideas all at one time. So let's not do that. Right? So I'll stop my presentation here. Would love to open it up for discussion, dialogue. And you may ask anything, you may make comments, you give your perspectives, anything you want to say. I'll do the best I can based on the studies I have done over the past 25, 30 years to try to present these ideas. It's a real blessing for me that you all are here. And it is an extraordinary journey, one that I wasn't planning on ever taking in angel wing. It is a very tenuous subject, trying to do it with humility, trying to do it with objectivity as much as possible. So thank you all so much.